All right. Well, welcome back to the Temporal Eternal podcast. We are so glad you are joining us today. And again, Temporal Eternal is where we discuss how to live for eternity in our relationships, ambitions, and time. And today, myself, Brennan, and Matt have a really fun topic, and it's a kind of a two-parter themed mountains and valleys, right? And that's definitely a familiar verbiage for, I would say the contemporary Christian church. There's some scriptures about mountains and valleys. A lot of those are themed around just the region, right? Commenting on those things. And there's some, where people might pull uh, some metaphors from, or just taking that and but overall, there's a principle within Christianity talking about different seasons and different challenges. And, you have mountains, which a lot of times are likened to really positive experiences, times of, peace. If you think about Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time for war and there's a time for peace. There's a time for joy and there's a time for weeping. Or maybe it's laughter and weeping, but regardless, there's just a ton of different seasons and different times for everything. So it really takens it from that thought process. And the valleys, right? You think about in Psalms 23, even though I walk the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, right? And so a lot of times the valley is likened to a challenging time, a lonely time, a time that is straining. And so we believe as Christians and as Christ followers, and this is, really anybody in life, but especially us as believers in Jesus and God, is that we go through good times and bad times. And not to say they're either one's negative, they're just have their different benefits and challenges. And so our goal for this podcast and then the next one as well is, man, what do we do? What is most important in the mountains and the valleys, right? In both of these seasons, what maybe gets forgotten, and what's maybe, doesn't get prioritized in general. So, before we hit our first, two kind of focuses today, I mean, I would love just to hear from you guys just on the whole thought process of mountains and valleys.
Well, real quick, let's go ahead and lay the groundwork. What is considered what's the mountain and what's the valley? Let's go ahead and lay that out real quick so people can have an idea. So is the mountain the good times or the bad times? Is the valley the good times or bad times?
Yeah, so I just laid it out. I literally just said that mountains were the good times.
You did say
Where
that?
Yeah, mountains were like kind of like the positive, the and maybe if I didn't clarify it right. So the mountains
Welcome to the
are
podcast, Matt.
Sorry, I had
no,
to
I
mute
for sure
myself.
nailed the valleys. So
Okay.
valleys are the challenging time. Maybe I didn't do the mountains effectively enough.
Okay,
So
my
mountains are
dogs were in the other room and I was
no, you're good. You're good. So mountains
sorry
again
about
are
that,
like,
Donald.
no, you're
Sorry.
fine, dude. No, you're good. We'll see if we edit this out or not. I want you to listen it back. I'm gonna listen to it back, and if I didn't do it well, we're keeping this because maybe I didn't explain it well because I
No,
totally
even
couldn't.
if you did explain it well, it's my fault for not listening, and my dogs were
Oh, you're fine.
distracting me.
You're fine. I zone Brennan out half the time, so you're fine. I'm just
Oh,
kidding, Brennan. I'm just joking, Brennan. This is all a joke.
Wow.
Um,
The
no,
truth
but
comes out.
no. No, but like so mountains a lot of times are likened to like positive experiences or experiences that don't have as much strain or challenges, seasons of blessing, seasons moments where we're receiving good fortune, or again it's just not challenging. Valleys is very much likened to dark times, lonely times, times of straining, times of fear or worry, times of
okay.
doubt,
I got
that
you.
sort of stuff. So
Yeah, so maybe it was just you when you did your long talk on it. I don't know.
so jumping back to
Good times are the mountains, low times are the valleys. That's what I
well, yes and no. Like, and I think that's something that is kind of the conversation too, is like I think that we um I almost think, and even as I was describing it, last few minutes, I almost don't even like me saying good times are the mountains, bad times are the valleys, because I think that that's almost a because I say that, and that's how a lot of us think about it. But I almost think that that's a incomplete view of the seasons of mountains and valleys, right? Is
So
because we associate
yeah,
good with less pain. You're
uh,
muted, Brennan.
Brennan, you muted yourself.
There we go. I was going to say, no, I think that's a great point, because who's defining what the mountaintop is or what the valley is, And you could say, okay, success by the world standard is when you hit a specific number in your bank account, or whatever you're doing, whether it's in a certain industry or field, when you've hit certain success or fame, that's the mountaintop. But emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, like, where are you at? So if it's being defined as, hey, you're here, you got it all going on, you got everything you're going for, but your life on the inside is terrible, then are you really experiencing that? So not to drift too far off it, but I think that's a good point, is what is being defined by it. And I think in context of what we're talking about too, spiritually, within our life, whatever experience we might be going through, good or bad, hard, difficult, whatever that looks like, is what is that position that somebody listening right now might be in, and how do they face that in terms of walking in the relationship with God? So yeah, it's a good place to say, okay, who's defining that?
Yeah, my thoughts on it are, I'm very optimistic. Donald knows this. Like, Donald, Brennan, you probably know it too now. But I'm very optimistic on everything.
He is. He's a
So
happy-go-lucky guy.
yes. So I look at everything as a positive. Oh, except for that fault, like my laptop just fell. So
That was amazing.
Just on a roll today, aren't we?
For those who are watching on YouTube, it like literally for a second looked like Matt was like about to go to a roller coaster, like the way the angle was, and he's like, it was pretty awesome. Okay, continue. So you said you're positive, you're an optimist.
I'm very positive and optimistic about things. So I find opportunities, and I try to find opportunities in everything, and I look at it as a win-win situation, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm always going to be learning from every situation I do, whether it's a good situation or a bad situation. I'm going to learn how to handle it for next time, or I can help someone else in the future handle it. But yeah, I always have a positive look on it. So yeah, now you're laughing at Brennan. So
I'm gonna have to edit it. I'm sorry. First my thing, and then your laptop falls, and I was good. I recovered really well. I put you right back where you needed to be. Like, okay, yep, set you right back up, and then all of a sudden,
I think this podcast needs to stay like
tipped
this.
me over.
I think it's good.
Let's turn my fan on. I'm sweating here.
I think it's good. Donald, we don't need to edit this out. This is fun. This keeps things exciting.
Okay. No, I think that, right. I think that's a good point, which is our mentality, towards it. So here's, diving into the, two thoughts, right. Or topics in this whole mountain and valleys for part one is two things. Worshiping God and how we deal with emotion, how we embrace emotion. So let's start with worshiping God. A lot of times, there's a few different situations that can happen. You can, in a good season, right, worship God because it's a little bit easier. You're like, hey, life is great. Everything's good. So my worship, and when we say worship, not just worship in the confines of a church service with a group of believers, but really just your life of worship, your intimacy with God, the way you live for God, like that being worship. So many times, people might find it easier to worship during the good times. On the other end, sometimes people might find it more challenging to worship God during the valleys, if you will, right? Because they're just like, they're so enthralled with what's going on. And it's really, I remember times in my life where a family situation might be happening, or a personal situation, or finances, or whatever it may be, health, whatever. And very much that can steal my focus and my attention. And so it actually takes away from my worship for Jesus, right? That it can actually take away from that. In the same way, there can be, and that's why I'm hitting it from all different angles, because I think anybody who is a Christian can fall into any of these little categories when it comes to our worship. In the same way, there are some people that worship God during the hard times because they're at their breaking point. They have nowhere else to go. But it becomes more challenging during the good times for them because everything's going well, and they have set up a precedent that their devotion to God is really based upon the season that they're in. And then they put a little bit of less emphasis or focus on their worship to Jesus because everything's going good. And so just during the hard times, it affects their worship. So really, we're called to be in communion with God, in relationship with God, no matter where our journey takes us, no matter if it's a valley or a mountain or an in-between. And we're supposed to worship God regardless of the situation. So thoughts there, guys?
Yeah, I think something that comes to mind for this idea is that when we think about it, God is with us wherever we go, whatever we're facing. And so if you're in kind of a valley right now and you're experiencing a really tough time, think about the idea that God, not just the idea, the reality that God is standing there with you. He is with you always. And so I think when we kind of go for the compare and contrast, and we a lot of times miss out, I think, on the time in the middle. When you've hit rock bottom, I mean, you feel it, you know it. You're at the end of your rope. You're reaching out for anything. And so, yeah, so when we think about that idea in consideration of our worship and our focus on God, so many times it can be clouded when we're in the lowest of our lows in the valley by trying to get out. And one of two things: we either will grab onto God and say, God, I can't do this without you. I need to wait on you. I need to trust in you. I need to stand in faith in you. And those are all things that are way easier said than they are done, especially when we're kind of at the end of the rope and we're waiting for an answer from the Lord, literally, to move forth in life. Whether that's an experience that you're walking through now or something that you're in the midst of. And so I go back to that idea that I think that we have to be reminded that no matter where we're at on the level of that playing field, or this imagery of the lows and the highs, the valleys and the mountains, is that God is with us in both. And so what is our response to that? What does that look like within my worship to realize, wow, when I'm hitting the hard times, God is with me. When I'm doing great, God is with me. And I'll tell you guys, like, when I've been in the low places, you know we learn from our mistakes, and we learn from our past experiences, right? And so I think that I could have take an inventory and evaluation of the low times and say, man, I really could have probably focused on God more on both ends of the spectrum of things. And so yeah, I think it starts in a place of, okay, realizing God is with you wherever you're at. And so if you're saying, yeah, guys, I'm right there in the midst of the hardest season I have ever walked through in my life, and I don't know what that is for you, but a reminder that God is with you. He's not given up on you. He's not letting go of you or your situation or the outcome, and he will give you the strength and the tools to climb out of that. And of course, we see that maybe once we've gotten through walking through a valley season and in a low season, and it's easier to say that in retrospect. But I think when you go through that and you experience God's presence, His power, His presence with you along the way, you realize that, wow, okay, next time I hit a season like that, that's the first place I'm going to run to. But yeah, I think if we're all honest, right, guys, like we've been in different points where we're like, yeah, I could have focused more on the Lord. I could have pressed in more to Him and seen what He was doing in the midst of it, whether it was good situation or bad situation, but realize he's always with us. And he's never going to give up on whatever we're facing.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in situations where I'm super high, like on the top of the mountain. I feel like I'm on top of the mountain, and then there's times where I'm at the very low of the valley, and um, I've been at the low of the valley a couple times. One of them was when my dad had cancer, and that was, I mean, I was just high school, senior year of high school, coming out, and then he died um, a year or two after I graduated, and that really took a toll on me. But that is when I was worshiping the hardest. You know, um, for me, I typically, when I'm not in a bad time, I start getting comfortable, right?
Mm.
Mm.
I start getting comfortable and I don't dig in. I don't worship as I should because I don't need anything in my mind. I don't need God to help me through life anymore because I'm good. But then I get smacked down and put right back in the valley. And God's like, "Hey, look, you need me."
Yeah.
And like I'm here for you. I'm here. I did this for you. Worship me and let me be the center of your life. And like, so my dad passed away. Then I went through the divorce slash dissolution, and that put me right back at the bottom. And uh, like I didn't put God in the relationship like I should have, and and He punished me for that. And just there's times where you need to worship, and you should always be worshiping, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes you forget that, and I forgot that when I was at the high. And like you were saying, some people make it easier to worship at the high because they have everything they want, so they know they can worship God. So I got to remember that personally. So
Yeah, that's why I brought up those kind of different perspectives because we're all wired differently, right? God's created us uniquely, and so we have tendencies. So that's why I want to, and there might be some other perspectives that I might not even have thought of, right? That somebody might be listening, going, "Well, no, I'm kind of like this," or a mix of that. But for me, that's why I share that because not everybody's going to think this way or that way. Something you kind of just said too about worship with centering ourselves, and even Brennan, like a lot of what you're saying with worship too. And then I want to go off of something you just said too, Matt. And so there's a lot of times with worship where it will center us, right, and it will center us back to it being about Jesus, right, in our mentalities, in our decision making, in our process. And so that's why it's important no matter what the season you go in. Now for Matt's situation, I always look at Matt's life, and like Matt, like you're incredible because um some of the most stressful times in people's lives, they say, is when they go through I think, like, because I worked at U-Haul, so that's why I knew this. Moving's like number 3 or something. Death is like obviously one of the top ones. Divorce is just as much as just right up there, right? With it's very similar, at least how, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but just society wise, how that can affect somebody. So some of the valleys that you guys hear Matt has gone through, that God's brought him through, are um, very significant, very potentially life altering, potentially traumatic. Like these are like big valleys. And so I think those are some ones to highlight, but also there are some where you go through a really tough time of just loneliness, right? And so that's why I want to bring up some other valleys as well, because like some of those ones, I'm just like, I mean, I look up to you in a lot of ways for those things that you've walked through, Matt, and how you still follow the Lord and you still are pressing in towards Him, because I just know that if I had to go through that, especially at the age that you went through some of those things, it would have been extremely difficult for me. And I don't know if I would have been able to handle it as well as you did. I don't know if I ever said that, but now it's on
Oh, I
record here.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, I love you, bro.
Well, I
Um,
I gotta give credit to
but
my family though, because
yeah,
the my family is very strong in the Lord. So I
hmm
was, and with us being, I was a PK my whole life. So I had church
hmm
family surrounding me. So I've had a different situation than most people anyway. So yeah.
for sure. And that's something we're going to hit in the next episode too. So if you're just listening to this one, we're gonna hit just the people around you on the journey. That'll be the next one too. But yeah, so yeah, so there's different valleys, right? There's some that are more extreme than others, but they're all significant, right? Like they all are important, and God cares about all of them. And maybe it's a lot of times people say like a dry season where it's hard for them to hear the voice of the Lord, or it's just like, I don't know what you have for me, God. Like, and there's just kind of this like unknown type of like, okay, let me be faithful in this time of waiting. But regardless of it, I think worship is a huge piece. The second one that we wanted to really focus on for the back half of this episode is our emotions, right? And so for me, I'm a very emotive person. If you on this podcast, I'm a little bit more chill. Then I mean, like sometimes like my personality can be a little bit out there. I've been considered an extrovert, which I don't know where they get that from. Um, but but for me, when it comes to emotions, like for so long, and I think literally in the last couple of years, I've really tried to taper it down, not try to take away how God's wired me and my excitement and my passion, because that's some of the greatest gifts God's given me. But learning to embrace my emotion, but not live by my emotion. Because what would happen for me is I would go through different seasons of my life, and it would be like, hey, the mountain's great and I'm doing awesome, and then the valley comes and I'm not. Why? Because I attached my emotion to the season I was in, and then that controlled my mindset, my heart, my spirit, my decision making, the way I look at life, right? So that's where it gets a little tricky, where your emotion can really dictate the way you walk through mountains and valleys. And so, like, yes, it's a good thing, and it's a good thing. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, even like the sadness, even like the those type of emotions that maybe have a negative connotation, like those sort of things bring about perspective. It's not all about just being happy your whole life. Like, this is a piece of what God has given us as humanity, right? So there's at that same time, though, we have to be careful that we are mindful and we are self-aware of where our emotions are at during the season that we're in, and how it is affecting us in our mindset and also in our decision making.
Yeah, I think you said a key thing too there is like, what is the consistency there too? Because whether we're in a low place or a great place and a high place on the mountaintop, you know, what does that consistency look like? Because that's all going to absolutely affect, our decision making. A lot of times, I know at least because all of us are emotional beings, right? Myself, it's like when we're in a hard place, if we start acting off of certain emotions, or making decisions based on certain emotions with what we're going through, that could be a dangerous place. And I know I've been there, where I've been in those places where it's like I was emotionally responding within relationships, within my walk with God at different places, and it wasn't good, and so I think that's a key factor, is like, okay, not only where are we focusing with our worship, but then I think this is huge for many of us, is, are we in check with our emotions? And when stress hits, what do we do? When life circumstances around us that are out of our control, how are we going to respond? Are we going to shut down within our faith? Are we going to shut down with our relationships and other people? And that's a huge responsibility. And I know so many of us struggle with that, where a stressful or very dark and serious situation comes up that we might be facing, and we just shut down, or depression or anxiety comes in. And it's a tough spot. And sure, you can give the Christian answer, just be like, hey man, like, trust in God, everything's going to be okay. But then you're like, no, but in my situation right now, it doesn't feel like that. And it doesn't look like
Yeah.
that.
You
And
still have to
so what do
walk
I
through
do?
that.
You know?
Yeah, you still have to deal with
Yeah.
it. Like, not only you have the
Yeah.
knowledge, but you still have to, like, deal with the anxiety or deal with the depression.
Right, right. And it's kind of like, if you think about this picture came to mind too. It's like, the transition between the valley and a mountaintop. I'm not by any means a hiker or a climber, but if you've seen any mountains, right, and some crazy, hiking experiences that people have done, it's like, that's tough. That's hard to get from the valley to the mountaintop is tough, And so if you think about that within your emotions, that's going to be a roller coaster. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs within that. And so, yeah, attitude is huge. And so I say that to say, can we lean into the Lord within that, and something very practical. If you've been in church for some time at all, you've probably heard this, or maybe if you've been in church your entire life, you heard this in, kids church, is the fruit of the Spirit. When you really start to break down what that looks like, if you can have love, if you can have joy, if you can have peace, if we can glean from the Lord to take in those things, that's going to speak volumes into how we're allowing ourselves to be filled by God, filled by the word in the midst of our situation, that can speak to those things. And I believe that we can find that peace in the midst of the darkness when depression and anxiety and darkness and stress hits. You know what I mean? And so I think that's so important. And that's a basic principle even Jesus talks about is to come to the Lord with our burdens, and he will give us rest. So put that in terms of your emotions. How do you deal with emotions when you're going through a tough time or you're going through a great time? How do you not become overzealous in your joy, where you just become you're bragging about everything? It could be on both ends of things, but how can we look to the Lord and say, hey, God, this is what I have right here. This is what's on my shoulders right now. And if I'm truly going to give it to you, I got to see it from your perspective. I got to see it from your lenses.
So, like, the emotions part, I believe, like Brennan was bringing up, it's not easy to go up the hill, up the mountain. It's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that like, if you live by the emotions, you're killing yourself. You're wearing yourself out by doing that. So you're fighting against yourself to get through a situation if you're living by the emotions. And that's the biggest thing for me, is stop living by emotions and live for God and just keep going. I mean, yeah, that's the typical Christian answer, right? It's not easy to say, like, I was for church, at an old church I used to go to, we were mobile, right? So we would have to tear down and set up every week. And so my, the worship pastor, she was always very like, we got to get it done. We got to get it done. We got to get it done, and living by emotions. And because she was like, we got to make sure. I was like, it's fine. Just calm down. We got it. And it's like, we would always pull it off. But she was always freaking out, and she was living by the emotions and not trusting. Like, I'm not saying that she was, and she wasn't, but it was just like, it seemed like craziness, was happening. So I just think we should live how God wants us to live.
Yeah, and it's not like, and that's why I said, right, like, not living by them, but embracing them, right? Because, for me, I very much, because of my personality and my demeanor, a lot of emotion really fueled me, right? And also fueled a lot of times how I love people, is because of where I was at emotionally. But the danger of that was, when it's not going well, or I'm not in the mood, or I'm just having a funky day, it could affect the way God can use me, right? Because I could actually hinder the work of the Lord, in the sense of how, not to say I don't believe we can stop the move of the Holy Spirit and what God's going to do. God's going to do what God's going to do. But I think we can hinder how much he can use us in some ways, right? Or, I mean, he'll still, even that I get challenged with, to be honest with you guys. I wrestle even with saying that, because I think that God could use a donkey, so he could use me, and he's used me in my imperfection, and even in the midst of, my wrong mentality or in my sin, and God's like, hey, I still am going to do work. But so maybe I take that back, because I wrestle with that a little bit even live right now. But, I think that, thank you, Jesus. I repent of that, because that one's a challenging thought. I know some people completely disagree with that, but that's a whole nother, we definitely need to talk about that, because I keep bringing that up a few times. But really, when it comes to embracing the emotion, is it's acknowledging it. It's like, okay, like, thank you for this challenging season. Thank you for, this joyful season. Thank you for, whatever this season, and thank you for what these emotions are, how I'm feeling, what I'm going through. Okay. Now I take that emotion, I embrace it, and then I also go, okay, regardless of what's going on here, God, I worship you. God, I give you praise. And so, and to making sure that, I don't live by emotion, but I do believe when I embrace emotion, I have a greater awareness of what is going on. And so this is why it's super key. It's because I don't want to ignore it completely, right? Because when I embrace emotion, I have an understanding of, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And I'm finally at a place in my life where I'm starting to actually see, like, my hindrances, the places where I know I'm going to stumble, what causes, things to happen. Right. And, like, for instance, like, I have, since the age of like 14 or 15, like, I struggled with pornography. Right. And God's really brought me through that. And there's still moments, and, and lust and those sort of things like that. But I know what was fascinating is when I would fall into that temptation or that sin, and that emotion, anger would come out, selfishness would happen, right? So there'd be like things on top of things that would have ripple effects on my decision. And so with anything that we have, right, within our own decisions, within our own emotions, we, as you get closer to God, and he shows you who you are and how you're wired, and on top of that, as you live enough life that you start to see patterns, you start to go, when I am facing loneliness, these are the things I'm going to fall into. These are the things, the different environments I'm going to put myself into. I might, seclude myself instead of being near people. And so with that, I embrace the emotions I have, because sometimes it's a blessing. Sometimes emotions are fuel. It's like, in the Fast and the Furious movies where they're, nitrous. It's like, Vin Diesel, man, anything can happen with family. Like, Vin Diesel, how you in space? Man, nothing's impossible. Anyway, there's like a meme about it. It's hilarious. But like with the nitrous, it's this extra boost, right? And so I do think that God gives us that emotion and those passions. You think about Peter, right? And in Acts, and for the, when the Holy Spirit came in the upper room, and then he came out and preached to thousands, and that was emotion that was used for the glory of God. So, we don't live by it, we embrace it, we use it with however God has given us to use it, but then also we embrace it to know, okay, how is this going to affect me? How do I need to guard my heart, myself? How do I need to surround myself, so that I don't fall into the same patterns or the same things, because I know I'm apt to do that during this, whatever, fill in the blank.
I'm good, bro. I don't have anything to say on that.
Any final thoughts, I guess, on that, or anything else as we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I think, going off what you said, Donald, like, just like simply like looking at it for us as people, as believers, are we taking an inventory of how we respond, because that emotion, that energy, that passion that we have, is going to go somewhere, right? And so are we willing to in faith walk that out with the Lord, and put that passion, put that emotion behind pursuing God and his word and what he's called us to do in the midst of every situation that we face, versus putting it in the things. Because I think that we can track the patterns we go through in life.
Yeah.
And it's like we can either go one of two ways. We can fall into our old ways, our past mistakes, let those things tear us down, or we could do as Jesus did time and time again. When he approached somebody and he brought a healing, first he would say many times, your sins are forgiven. Now get up and walk and go, so you, wherever you might be in the situation, you might be in the valley, you might be on the mountaintop, what is that thing that you need to look to the Lord and just trust in him, and let him be the driving factor within your focus, within your worship, within your emotions, and how you respond to the situation.
That's good.
Yeah, that's really good. And my thing is just keep worshiping God, because I've learned that myself. When you stop worshiping, things get rough. And
Definitely.
at least for me,
And sometimes the waters don't get. Here's the thing: when you stop worshiping God, and let's say you're in the harbor, and so it's sometimes not an immediate effect, but then like in, I think, Hebrews 11:1, possibly that one, but I think it is. But it talks about where it's like, be careful you don't drift away, right? Like, Matt, like sometimes you drift, and then all of a sudden you're, not to say you're not going to be exempt from storms no matter what you're doing for God, but sometimes the effect isn't right away.
Right. Oh yeah, there's definitely a delay sometimes. So yeah, just keep your heart on God and keep worshiping him, because once you stop worshiping, things get rough.
Definitely.
Rapid fire. At least for me.
No, for sure. Rapid fire application, right? The 60 seconds, because I know we're really at the end here. You might be, when your emotions go someplace, you might go into an environment that is not good for you, in a public place. Maybe it's a party scene. Your emotions are taking you someplace, and you go towards the pantry and towards the snack. Gluttony is, talked about in the Bible. You are feeling this emotion, and all of a sudden you hit somebody up in their DMs, or you talk to the certain individual of the opposite sex. When your emotions, are at a certain place, you start to hang out online more when you probably shouldn't. And I'm not even saying like, pornography. That could just be negative news that is just like pulling you down, or toxic people, or comparison because you're looking at other people's lives and it's making you more depressed about your own. Television, movies, the type of, sexuality or graphic violence, or living in fantasy world and then not actually dealing with the reality of your life. So there's a ton of things that your emotions could bring you to. So I really challenge you this week to think about those things. Like Brendan said, start to have an inventory of like, what do I do when my emotions feel this way? Where do I go? Where are my thoughts? Where am I physically?
What's your escape?
Totally. What is, and is that escape healthy or not? And are you actually dealing with or walking through things with God or not? So thank you guys again for joining the Temporal Eternal podcast. Once again, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Please feel free to subscribe on YouTube. We really appreciate it. And please, please, please give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify if you had a good experience and you enjoy the podcast. Thank you all so much, and be back next week as we talk about part 2 of Mountains and Valleys.
See ya.